Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are doing one of my favorite videos to film every year, which is my best books of the year. So of the 78 books that I read in 2023, these are my top 10 favorite reads. I am going to be splitting this into two sections. One is my top 5 favorite rereads and my top 5 favorite new to me reads. And I really wanted to include my rereads in this because a lot of my reading in 2023 was rereads. About a third of my reading was rereading, and it was some of my favorite stuff that I read. It's kind of like obvious that it would be because I was rereading books that I already knew I liked, but that doesn't stop it from being some of my favorite reading from the year. So I really wanted to include my rereads in this top 10 list. So I'm gonna start with my top 5 favorite rereads, and this isn't going to be in any like particular order. I'm just gonna go in the order that I read them. And I don't think I'm gonna really get into synopses in this video, but just talk a little bit about why I loved them and how they ended up on this list. So first up, not only the first on this list, but actually my very first read of the year in 2023, which was A Psalm for the Wild-Built and A Prayer for the Crown-Shy by Becky Chambers. This is the Monk and Robot duology. It is hope punk sci-fi, and what I really love about this series is that I feel like when I reread it, I get something new out of it. That'll probably be a theme that you see in some of my favorite rereads, because that is one of my favorite things about rereading, and one of the markers to me of a great book is when you can reread it and you get something new out of it every time. You notice new things. I really love also that with this series, you can read it in different ways depending on what you want to get out of it. I know you can read it as just like a very sweet, cozy sci-fi about this optimistic future, but I think that it also has this great undercurrent of like a philosophical questions or conversation that it is having, especially around work and meaning and purpose, and how we as individuals and within our society think about our, like, relate to work and think about our own purpose in life and in our communities. It is delightful in its like optimism and warmth and coziness, but it is also, I think, really delightful in the fact that it takes this idea of a better future very seriously. You know, imagining an optimistic future is not just something fluffy. It takes this idea very seriously and really thinks about like, what would that look like? What would that mean? And how would that affect the people in this world? So I just loved rereading this, and I am sure I'm going to reread it again. Next up, I have Emperor Mage by Tamara Pierce. This is part of the Immortals Quartet. I did a big reread of all of Tamara Pierce's Tortall books in 2023, which was so much fun. These are the books that I really grew up with, and her books are the ones that really got me into reading and into reading fantasy. So it was so much fun to revisit these. Growing up, the Immortals Quartet was my favorite series within the world of Tortall, and while I think my opinions on that have changed a little bit as to like which is my all-time favorite, it was still so much fun to reread this series. I really love this one in particular because, I mean, the main character has like wild magic, which means that she can speak to animals, she can heal animals, she can transform into animals, and it has one of my favorite romances in the like among the Tortall series. And I think that this series is one of the places where my love of badgers started, because there is a badger god that shows up throughout the Immortals Quartet, who I love very much. This is the third book in the quartet, and this was my favorite one of the series. I don't think I really appreciated this one when I was younger. It was never one of the books in the series that I remembered particularly vividly, but on reread, I really loved this because I think that we got such a great like expansion of the world, because in this one they get to visit another country, they go to Carthage, we learn a little bit more about like another country that we've never been to before. They have a very different culture, and it's really interesting to see our main character Dane kind of thrown into this new environment that is so out of her element. It is a very different culture. They have different gods, and they have different animals, which is very important to her, and the way that she really learns so much more about her magic and she has to deal with all of these changes is so interesting to see. This one also within the series had the best pacing, so this was very fun to reread. My next favorite reread though was also by Tamara Pierce, part of the Tortall world. This is Squire. It is also the third book, I'm realizing, in the Protector of the Small series. As a kid, the Protector of the Small series was actually my least favorite series, and I think that part of that was because, you know, our main character Kel didn't have any magic, there wasn't a central romance to the story, and as a character, she's a lot more like restrained. I think some of the characters we had seen before this, like Alana, is very like fiery and brash, and Dane is very like sweet and caring and compassionate, and Kel is just very reserved and thoughtful. And I think that, you know, as a reader, as like a 12-year-old, that was maybe less exciting to me. But some of those things that I didn't like as a kid are some of the reasons that I loved this so much now as an adult. I really like the fact that she doesn't have magic and she has to figure out other ways of engaging with the world around her when there are many different magic users. I really liked also that there isn't a central romance. It meant that the story got to focus on other things, and while there were some, you know, romances, you know, here and there, it was interesting to see her approach them in this very like logical way, and it wasn't the type of romance that takes over the whole plot and sweeps away the main character and all of that. She is again very like reflective and thoughtful and has different priorities, and romance doesn't really take center stage for Cal. And then finally, the fact that she is this kind of quiet and reflective character was just one of the things I loved most about this. I found her so interesting in this book because she really thinks about who is the person, like who do I want to be? Who am I going to become? And she has these really interesting moments of reflection where she very actively, like as a 11 or 12-year-old, is thinking about how the actions I take today and the choices I make now form who I become in the future. And so she really actively has to think about and choose who does she want to be in the future, what kind of knight does she want to be, and then making those active choices now to become the person that she wants. And I just thought that type of reflection was so interesting to read about, and I just loved it. It was so fascinating. Also, as a part of the larger Tortall world, the Protector of the Small series is, I feel like, where the world really starts to expand. We start to learn so much more about this world and we get to see a lot of the ramifications of actions and choices from the previous two series really taking effect in the Protector of the Small series. So I feel like this one really opens up the world, and also I think is some of her best thematic work as well, especially around this idea of being the protector of the small. I think each series and character, you know, has something that they are addressing and grappling with, but I just feel like the Protector of the Small series is the strongest thematic work in the world of Tortall. And within that series, Squire was my favorite. I actually don't remember very clearly why Squire was my favorite, but I know I have a very strong feeling that this was my favorite one in the series. All right. after that, my next favorite reread was Felix Ever After by Kaysen Callender. This is a little bit of a surprise to me that it's on my favorite, just for the fact that it is a YA contemporary, which is not a genre that I read very often. And so it's always like interesting to me when a book from a little red genre of mine ends up on a favorite list. But I reread Felix Ever After, and I just loved it even more on reread. I think this is another one that you can kind of read different levels into the story, and the first time I read this book, I think I was much more focused on the external plot of the story, but this time I was able to focus more on the like internal journey that our main character Felix was going on. The book really, while there is all of this, you know, story and plot going on around our main character, it's really about Felix learning more about himself, and not just his own identity, but really his ability to love himself and therefore let other people in and let other people love him. And I just find our main character Felix to be such a lovable main character, and I loved just, you know, watching his journey this time, and I'm so glad that I read it or reread it and got something new out of it and got to focus on more of that internal journey. And then the final reread I'm going to talk about today is Garden Spells by Sarah Addison Allen. This is a kind of witchy family, fabulism kind of story. It has garden magic, baking magic. It is about, you know, people reconnecting with family and, you know, restarting their life. I just love this book. It's so cozy and it is so wholesome. I read this when I was really in the mood for something that felt kind of like the Practical Magic movie, and this definitely provides that vibe. I think it's a little more on the like wholesome side than that, but I just always find this book to be so whimsical and cozy, and you know, I just always fly through it and enjoy it so much. It's just such a delight to read this. Okay, so those are my top 5 favorite rereads for 2023. Now we can get into my favorite new to me reads from the year. These ones I am sort of ranking in that, like, the first 3 are ranked and then my top 2 are kind of on the same level. I couldn't really decide which was my favorite of the 2. So we'll start with ranking my 5 through 3, and then the top 2 will be the same tier. So first up at number 5 is actually a graphic novel series, which is Sleepless by Sarah Vaughn and Leila Del Duca. This is a like fantasy graphic novel series about like a princess and her bodyguard, and this I read when I was really in the mood for like medieval knight kind of vibes, and this very much provided that. I just thought it was such a like enjoyable story, but a lot of why I loved it really was the art and how the art really created this great atmosphere and vibe to it. I mean, the art really does follow what the covers look like, which I really appreciate. I think sometimes graphic novels, you know, have really beautiful covers and then the art inside does not match it, but the art inside does really follow what the covers look like, which I appreciate. So this series was just really fun to read. It was so beautiful, and I probably will reread it, especially for the art, but I enjoyed the story and the characters very much as well. So this is my number 5 spot for the year. And then my number 3 spot is Unraveler by Frances Harding. This is a YA fantasy standalone, and it's the first thing that I have read from Frances Harding, but I really want to read more from her now. What I loved about this was just how interesting this world was. It had some interesting ways that the magic worked and the magical creatures in this world. I enjoyed the characters so much that there are elements to like the structure of the plot that normally may not have worked for me, especially because it's kind of a series of small mysteries that they're solving, which isn't something that would normally work for me. But I enjoyed the world and the characters so much in this that I was just in it for the ride, and I was really loving seeing how all of these different pieces wove together as the characters solved each little piece of the mystery to kind of put together this larger plot. But as I said, a lot of what I loved about this was also just this world. It was so interesting. It has this kind of dark, whimsical feel to it that I loved, that feels whimsical in a very grounded way. It feels like it could be a real place, and it felt like a very vivid world. I really loved reading this, and I'm really excited to read more from this author. I am so interested to see just more of her creativity in, you know, worlds and stories. All right, and now we are finally onto my top 2 favorite reads of the year. So these are pretty much tied. I couldn't really decide which one was going to get the top slot. So my top 2 are in no particular order, but first up is The White Mare by Jules Watson. I read this pretty early in the year, and I just adored it. This is historical fiction, historical fantasy. It does have some fantastical elements in the form of their religion, but it definitely, you know, has a lot of the trappings of things that I tend to enjoy. I loved her writing in this. It's the type of writing that just flows in a way that makes it so easy to read, I think, while really, you know, painting these characters. I think the characters are really the strength of this and what made me love it so much. I mean, I enjoyed the setting and the plot and everything like that, but the characters and the dynamics between them were what really drew me in for this one. I think the characters as individuals feel very real, and they feel realistically flawed. There are many times where they will make decisions that are frustrating or set back, you know, progress that has been made in the relationships, but I think it always feels very understandable and very human and authentic to these characters. So I really loved how realistic they felt. And then I also loved how the romance was done in this, because for one thing, it was truly a slow burn romance. It takes forever for them to get together, and it is a hate to love kind of slow burn. I also really appreciated how the book handled the main character's PTSD, because she is dealing with PTSD from a violent attack and sexual assault, and that is one of the things that is really impacting you know, this relationship between the two main characters, and it doesn't feel like it is ever brushed aside or forgotten or a quick fix. It is kind of ever present, and even when the romance does, you know, come together, it doesn't just disappear. As I said, you know, her memories and the traumas that she has experienced are still present and still something that they have to address. It is just now they address it together. And so I just really appreciated that, and I loved the characters in this, loved their relationship, loved the way that that was handled. This first book, The White Mare, was really my favorite. This is a trilogy that's is really more of a duology, is the first 2 books, and then there's a companion like sequel. This first one is really the one that is my favorite, but the second book is good as well, and then the companion sequel was not great, but I loved the first book and this like first duology. And then finally, my other favorite book of the year is The First Sister by Lyndon A. Lewis. This one is a little bit of a surprise to me. As much as The White Mare is kind of predictable, like it has all the trappings of some of my favorite things, The First Sister was a bit of a surprise because, for one thing, it is sci-fi. It's fairly fast-paced sci-fi as well. But when I read this at the end of the year, I just immediately became obsessed with this book and this series. I think this is another one where some of the real strengths of this are the characters. Lyndon A. Lewis does a fantastic job of just drawing you in and connecting you to these characters so immediately. So even in this first book that is pretty fast paced, so we don't get a lot of like downtime with characters and we may not get a ton of like depth, I just felt so immediately connected to them anyway. I was so fascinated, I just wanted to spend more time, and I was immediately emotionally engaged with them. I read this first book and the second book, The Second Rebel, in December, and I loved them both. The first book was probably my favorite of the two, but I did truly love both of these. In the second book, at least, we get a little bit more into the world. We have a little bit more time with the characters, and it does push forward some of these plot elements and these characters. So I just have been loving this series. I think it has created such an interesting world with some very interesting dynamics, themes that it is addressing, but really the characters are the things that are drawing me into this series and make me love it so much. But I think it is because it has kind of all of these elements together that is making me like obsessed with this series, and I'm so excited to continue on with it. Okay, so those were all of my favorite books from 2023. I would love to know, have you read any of these, or what was one of your favorite books that you read in the year? But these books definitely were highlights of my year and made it a really great year of reading. And let's hope that 2024 is also a great year of reading. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.